Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now, let's begin. Thomas Lawson stood at the edge of the freshly turned earth, his 9-year-old daughter Emma's small hand gripping his with a strength that belied her size. The California sun beat down mercilessly on the small gathering of mourners, colleagues from the publishing house, a handful of Stella's university friends, his literary agent. Noticeably absent were the people who should have been there. His mother, his brother, his sister. The pastor's words washed over him like static. Thomas wasn't religious, and neither had Stella been, but Emma had asked for something normal, and he would give his daughter whatever she needed. He studied her profile, Stella's delicate nose, his own stubborn jaw, eyes red-rimmed but dry now. She cried herself empty over the past 3 days. 3 days since his wife of 11 years had collapsed in their kitchen. An aneurysm, the doctors said, quick and catastrophic. No warning. No goodbye. Stella Warner, now Stella Lawson, had been making Emma's lunch one moment and gone the next. Thomas had built a career exposing the worst of humanity. His true crime books had made the bestseller lists 4 times over. The Painted Smile Killer, Blood in the Boardroom, The Mercy House Murders, each one a deep dive into darkness. Meticulously researched, unflinchingly honest. He'd interviewed serial killers, sat across from sociopaths, stared into the abyss of human cruelty, and written about it with clinical precision. But nothing had prepared him for this. For the absolute wrongness of Stella's absence. The funeral home had handled the service with practiced efficiency. Thomas had signed papers, made decisions, moved through it all like a ghost himself. Now, as the pastor finished and people began offering their condolences, he felt Emma tugging his jacket. "Dad, we need to go soon." The flight? Right, the flight. Back to Sacramento, where they'd been living for the past 2 years while he researched his latest book. He'd grown up in the city, and after years in New York and Los Angeles, Stella had wanted Emma to experience a different pace of life. Thomas had agreed, finding the change refreshing. His mother Pauline, brother Curtis, and sister Cassie still lived there in the family home in East Sacramento, a sprawling Victorian that had been in the Lawson family for 3 generations. Thomas had bought that house for them, paid off the mortgage when his second book hit big. It was supposed to be a gesture of reconciliation after years of distance, a way to mend fences. His family had always been complicated. His father's death, when Thomas was 16, had fractured something that never quite healed. Pauline had become bitter, critical. Curtis had grown into a man who felt entitled to everything and grateful for nothing. Cassie, the youngest, had learned to manipulate with tears and tantrums. But Thomas kept trying, kept hoping, kept sending money when Curtis's business ventures failed, when Cassie needed help with her wedding, when Pauline's medical bills piled up. Stella had questioned it, gently at first, then more firmly. "They're using you, Tom," she'd said 6 months ago, after Curtis had asked for $50,000 to invest in some cryptocurrency scheme. "They don't appreciate what you do. They just expect it. They're family," he'd replied, a weak defense even to his own ears. "We're family," Stella had countered, gesturing to Emma doing homework at the kitchen table. "This is your family. The rest are just people who share your DNA." She'd been right, of course. Stella was always right about people. As a psychology professor at Sacramento State, she'd had an uncanny ability to read between the lines, to see the manipulation tactics that Thomas, for all his expertise in criminal behavior, somehow missed when it came to his own blood. Now, she was gone, and he was flying back to Sacramento with their daughter, expecting what? Support? Comfort? He should have known better. At the airport, Emma sat beside him at the gate, her backpack clutched on her lap. She'd packed her favorite books, her tablet, and the stuffed elephant Stella had given her for her 5th birthday. Thomas stared at his phone, composing the text to his family. He typed carefully, "Just buried my wife, flying home with our daughter at 5 p.m. Please pick us up." He sent it to the family group chat, the one Cassie had created last year with a bright purple icon and the name Lawson Family Forever. The response came faster than he'd expected. "Curtis, get Uber." 2 words. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "We're thinking of you." Just a dismissive brush off, as if Thomas had asked him to grab milk from the store. Thomas felt something cold settle in his chest. Emma was looking at her own phone. He'd given her one last year, with restricted access, mainly for emergencies, and to stay in touch when she was at friends' houses. She was on the family chat too. He saw her eyes widen, her lips press into a thin line. Then Pauline's message appeared. Sorry, we're celebrating your sister's birthday. Cassie's birthday. Thomas felt a bitter laugh build in his throat. Of course, Cassie had turned 34 today, an unremarkable age, but she'd been planning this party for months, talking about it every time they spoke. A garden party at the house Thomas had bought them, catered by some expensive restaurant, 50 of her closest friends. Emma's fingers flew across her screen. Thomas watched her type. No worries. His daughter's face was carefully blank, the same expression she'd worn at the funeral when people said meaningless things about heaven and better places. She was protecting herself, building walls the way children do when adults fail them. Thomas looked out the window at the planes taxiing on the tarmac. Something was crystallizing inside him, sharp and clear as ice. For years, he'd made excuses for them. They'd had a difficult childhood. They'd lost their father young. They didn't understand his work, his world, his choices. But this? Abandoning him, and his daughter hours after burying their wife and mother because of a birthday party. Dad? Emma's voice was small. Are we really taking an Uber? Thomas looked at his daughter, this brave, brilliant girl who just lost her mother and was now learning that her extended family couldn't be bothered to pick her up from the airport. He saw Stella in her features, in the intelligence of her eyes, in the set of her shoulders. Yeah, sweetheart, he said softly. We'll take an Uber. He pulled up the app and requested a ride to the Hyatt downtown, not to the family home in East Sacramento. Emma noticed. We're not going to Grandma's? No, Thomas said. We're going to get settled first. Rest. We've had a long few days. Emma nodded, seeming relieved. Thomas felt his phone buzz with more messages. Cassie sending photos of her party setup. Curtis sharing a meme about birthday celebrations. Pauline asking if anyone had seen her good serving platter. None of them acknowledged his text. None of them mentioned Stella. The flight was quiet. Emma slept against his shoulder, exhausted from grief and shock. Thomas stared at the clouds below and thought about his family. Really thought about them, with the same analytical mind he brought to his books. Pauline Lawson, 62, had never worked a day after her husband died. She'd lived off the life insurance, then Thomas's support, maintaining her lifestyle while criticizing his choices. She'd hated Stella from the start, too educated, too opinionated, too unwilling to defer to Pauline's authority. Curtis Lawson, 36, had cycled through failed businesses like some men cycled through cars. He had a gift for charm and a talent for burning through money. His wife had left him 2 years ago, taking their son. Curtis blamed everyone but himself. Cassie Lawson Hastings, 34 now, had married Rod Hastings 3 years ago in a wedding that cost Thomas $250,000. Rod worked in real estate development, always talking about his next big deal, but they still lived in an apartment and drove leased cars. Cassie didn't work. She was an influencer, though her Instagram following was modest at best. Thomas had given them everything. Money, opportunities, chances, and in return, they'd given him judgment, demands, and now, in his darkest hour, indifference. The Uber driver was a quiet man who didn't try to make conversation, for which Thomas was grateful. He helped Emma into the hotel, got them checked in, and ordered room service. Emma picked at her food, then curled up on the bed and turned on the TV. Thomas stood by the window, looking out at the Sacramento skyline. His mind was working now, the way it did when he was deep in research, when he was hunting for the truth beneath the lies. Something Stella had said kept coming back to him. It had been 3 weeks before she died, late at night when they couldn't sleep. Your family is hiding something, Tom. I don't know what, but there's something wrong there. The way they panic when you ask certain questions, the way they deflect. It's not just narcissism or entitlement. There's something else. He dismissed it at the time, attributed it to her natural suspicion of people who'd never welcomed her. But Stella had been trained to spot deception. She consulted on his books, helped him understand the psychology of the criminals he wrote about. What if she'd been right? Thomas pulled out his laptop and opened a new document. He began typing, not a book this time, but a list. Questions, inconsistencies, things that had never quite added up. Why had Curtis's last 3 businesses failed so quickly, despite significant investment? Where did Cassie really get the money for her wedding contribution? She'd claimed to have saved it, but she'd never held a job longer than 6 months. Why had Pauline been so insistent that Thomas put the house in a family trust instead of just her name? And why this was the question that had been nagging at him since Stella's death. Why had Pauline called him the morning Stella died, 40 minutes before he'd found her, asking strange questions about life insurance policies? He hadn't thought about it at the time, drowning in shock and grief. But now, with distance and the cold clarity that came from rage, it seemed significant. Thomas opened another window and accessed his financial records. He'd been meticulous about tracking his support to his family, not out of mistrust, but because his accountant insisted on it for tax purposes. The numbers sprawled across the screen, and he began to really look at them. Over the past 10 years, he'd given his family $1.8 million. The number hit him like a physical blow. Nearly $2 million, handed over in increments, in emergencies, in investments, in gifts. Money that could have secured Emma's future, that could have given Stella the sabbatical she dreamed of. He drilled deeper into the records. Curtis's business loans, never repaid. Pauline's medical expenses, which seemed oddly high for someone who claimed to be healthy. Cassie's wedding, her car payments, her credit card debts that Thomas had paid off twice. And then he saw it. A pattern in the medical expenses. Pauline claimed to have chronic health issues that required expensive treatments. Thomas had been paying for them without question. What kind of son wouldn't help his mother with medical bills? But as he looked at the dates, the amounts, the providers, something didn't add up. The charges were from clinics that didn't exist at the addresses listed. The prescription costs were for medications that, when he searched them, weren't even used for the conditions Pauline claimed to have. Thomas felt his pulse quicken. This was the feeling he got when he was onto something in his research, when the pieces started falling into place. He opened a secure browser and began searching in earnest. Curtis's businesses he found in corporation records, dissolution papers, bankruptcy filings, but he also found something else, several LLCs with Curtis listed as a member, still active, still operating. Businesses Curtis had never mentioned, that supposedly didn't exist. He pulled up Cassie's social media. The public posts were all curated perfection: brunch photos, inspirational quotes, pictures of her and Rod at fancy restaurants. But he created a fake account and requested to follow her private Instagram, the one she thought was locked down. People always accepted follow requests from accounts that looked legitimate. He used a photo of a middle-aged woman, claimed to be a friend of a friend. She accepted within an hour. The private account was different. Luxurious vacations Thomas hadn't paid for. Designer purchases that should have been beyond her means. And photos from locations that made his blood run cold: Stella's university, the coffee shop near their house, the park where Emma played. Cassie had been in Sacramento more often than she'd ever mentioned. Much more often. Thomas heard Emma's breathing deepen into sleep. He glanced over at his daughter, curled around her stuffed elephant, and felt a fierce surge of protective rage. They'd taken advantage of him for years. They'd bled him dry financially. They'd treated Stella with contempt. And now, when he was at his lowest, they couldn't even be bothered to pick him up from the airport. But it was more than that. Stella's suspicions, the fake medical bills, Curtis's hidden businesses, Cassie's mysterious income, and her surveillance of his life, it all pointed to something bigger. Something darker. Thomas Lawson had made a career out of exposing the truth. He'd spent years in the muck of human depravity, documenting it, understanding it, revealing it to the world. Now, he was going to turn that lens on his own family. And he was going to find out exactly what they'd been hiding. Morning came too early. Emma woke with tears on her face, reaching for a mother who wasn't there, and Thomas held her while she cried. They ordered breakfast from room service. Emma pushed scrambled eggs around her plate, while Thomas made mental lists, plans forming like storm clouds. Dad, Emma looked up at him, her eyes ancient in her young face. Why didn't they want to pick us up? Thomas could have lied, could have made excuses. But he remembered Stella's voice. Tell her the truth. She's smart enough to handle it, and lies only teach her not to trust her own perceptions. Because they're selfish, he said simply. And I'm sorry you had to see that. Emma nodded slowly. Mom said they were mean to you, that they only called when they wanted something. She was right. Are we going to stay with them? No, sweetheart. We're going to stay here for a while. And then we're going home. To our house? Yes. To our house. Emma seemed to relax slightly. Then, can I see your laptop? I want to look at pictures of Mom. Thomas handed it over, making sure he'd closed the investigation windows first. Emma pulled up their photo library and scrolled through, stopping on a picture from last summer. Stella laughing, Emma on her shoulders, Thomas making a ridiculous face. They'd been at the beach, carefree, whole. While Emma looked at photos, Thomas's phone buzzed. He picked it up, saw the family chat was active again. Cassie, thank you everyone for making my birthday so special. Best party ever. Dozens of photos followed. The garden party in full swing. Pauline presiding over the cake cutting. Curtis with his arm around some woman Thomas didn't recognize. Rod glad handing guests. All of them smiling, laughing, celebrating. Not one message of condolence. Not one acknowledgement of Stella's death. Thomas took a screenshot. Then another. He saved every photo, every message, every piece of evidence of their callousness. His phone rang his literary agent, Miranda Cole. Tom, how are you holding up? Her voice was warm with genuine concern. Miranda had known Stella, had been to their house for dinners, had sent flowers to the funeral. Managing, he said. Emma and I are in Sacramento. With your family? No. Hotel. A pause. Miranda was sharp. She caught the weight in that single word. Tom, I don't want to add to your plate, but I had a call yesterday. The investigative journalism team at the Chronicle wants to talk to you about a potential collaboration. They're working on a story about charity fraud. Apparently, there's been a network of fake nonprofits operating in Northern California for years. They thought your expertise might be valuable. Thomas felt something click into place. Charity fraud? Yeah, they're being pretty tight-lipped about the details. But it's big. Millions of dollars. Dozens of victims. They want someone who can help them understand the psychology, the patterns. I told them you were dealing with a family emergency. But, set up the meeting, Thomas said. Tom, are you sure? I can tell them. Set it up, Miranda. Today, if possible. Another pause. Okay, I'll call you back with details. Thomas hung up and pulled up his search on the Lawson Family Trust. Pauline had established it 5 years ago. Insisted Thomas put the house and a substantial endowment into it. He'd done it to keep the peace, to ensure his family would be taken care of if anything happened to him. But the trust wasn't just the house. As he dug deeper into the legal documents, he found that Pauline had amended it several times, adding entities, creating subtrusts, building a complex web of holdings. And one of those entities was a nonprofit. The Lawson Legacy Foundation, established to support struggling families in the Sacramento area. Thomas's heart began to pound. He searched for the foundation, found a basic website with stock photos of happy families, vague mission statements, and a donation button. The board of directors listed Pauline Lawson as president, Curtis Lawson as treasurer, and Rod Hastings as secretary. No financial statements. No list of beneficiaries. No actual evidence of charitable work. Just a slick website and a mechanism to collect money. He searched deeper, found the IRS filings. The foundation had taken in over $3 million in the past 4 years. Most of it from private donors and corporate sponsors. Almost none of it had gone to actual charitable work. The expenses were listed as administrative costs, program, development, facility rental. Thomas sat back, his mind racing. This was it. This was what Stella had sensed. His family wasn't just selfish and narcissistic, they were criminals. They'd been running a charity scam, using his name and reputation as cover. And if they were capable of that, what else were they capable of? He thought about Pauline's phone call the morning Stella died, about Cassie's mysterious presence in Sacramento, about Curtis's hidden businesses. His phone buzzed Miranda, with the Chronicle meeting details. Noon today, their office is downtown. Thomas looked at Emma, still scrolling through photos of her mother, tears streaming silently down her face. They'd taken advantage of him for years. They'd stolen from people who couldn't afford to lose money. And maybe the thought made him cold. Maybe they'd done something to Stella when she'd gotten too close to the truth. Thomas Lawson had spent his career hunting monsters. He'd interviewed them, studied them, exposed them to the world. Now he was going to hunt the monsters in his own family. And when he was done, the whole world would know what they'd done. The Chronicle building was a monument to journalism's better days. all marble and brass in the lobby, creaking elevators that smelled of old paper and ambition. Thomas left Emma with a trusted former colleague, Jackie Goodman, a retired investigative reporter who'd helped him research his second book and who had known Stella well. Jackie had a granddaughter Emma's age, and the two girls had played together before. It was safe, comfortable, and gave Thomas the freedom to work. The investigative team was smaller than he'd expected, 3 people crammed into a conference room lined with whiteboards, covered in diagrams, photos, and scrawled notes. The lead reporter was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and ink-stained fingers, introduced as Mercedes Cannon. Her colleagues were younger, hungrier. Philip Curran, a data journalist who looked like he lived on coffee and conspiracy theories, and Juana Hines, a former prosecutor turned reporter who had the bearing of someone who'd seen too much and decided to do something about it. "Mr. Lawson, thank you for coming," Mercedes said, shaking his hand firmly. "Especially given your circumstances. We were sorry to hear about your wife." "Thank you," Thomas said. "My agent mentioned charity fraud." Mercedes exchanged glances with her colleagues. "What we're about to show you is confidential. We're still months away from publication, but we need expertise in understanding the people behind this. Your books on criminal psychology, particularly Blood in the Boardroom, showed you understand white-collar crime from the inside." She pulled up a presentation on the screen. The first slide showed a web of connections, corporations linked to nonprofits, names and numbers spiderwebbing across the display. "For the past 2 years, we've been tracking a network of fake charities operating across Northern California. They target middle-income donors with emotional appeals, sick children, struggling veterans, homeless families. They collect money, pay themselves executive salaries, and do minimal actual charitable work. When authorities investigate, they fold and pop up under new names." Philip jumped in, pulling up financial documents. "They've taken in over $20 million combined. Most of it vanishes into administrative costs and shell companies. The people running this are sophisticated. They know how to stay just on the right side of the law, how to structure things to avoid scrutiny." Thomas felt his stomach tighten. "You said 20 million total. How much from individual entities?" Juana consulted her notes. "The largest single operator we've identified has pulled in about 4 million over 5 years. They call themselves the Lawson Legacy Foundation." Mercedes was watching him carefully. "I take it that name means something to you." Thomas's voice was steady, controlled. "It's my family's foundation. My mother runs it." The room went quiet. Philip actually froze mid-sip of his coffee. "Mr. Lawson," Mercedes started, but Thomas cut her off. "I didn't know. I knew the foundation existed, but I thought it was legitimate. My mother established it, said it was to honor my father's memory, to help people the way he always wanted to." He paused. "How much of it is fraud?" Mercedes nodded to Juana, who pulled up more documents. "Nearly all of it. They've helped maybe a dozen families in 5 years, and those were mostly for show, photo opportunities for the website. The rest goes to salaries, expensive office rentals, consulting fees paid to companies owned by family members, vehicles, travel, equipment that never gets used for charitable work." "Show me everything," Thomas said. For the next 2 hours, they walked him through it. The Lawson Legacy Foundation was part of a larger network, but it was one of the most successful. Pauline had a gift for the pitch. She'd appear at churches, community centers, local events, telling stories about families they'd helped, children whose lives they'd changed. She'd collect checks, credit card numbers, promises of monthly donations. Curtis handled the money, moving it through various accounts, paying himself a $150,000 annual consulting fee for about 10 hours of actual work. Rod Hastings had brought in his real estate connections, helping them rent expensive office space they rarely used, billing it back to the foundation at inflated rates through his own company. And Cassie was the public face. Her Instagram, her social media presence, all carefully curated to show the foundation's work. The photos of happy families they'd helped were mostly stock images or paid actors. The emotional testimonials were fabricated. "We have sources," Mercedes said carefully. "People who worked for the foundation, who got uncomfortable and left. They've given us documents, internal emails, recordings. But we need more. We need to understand the psychology. How do people like this justify it to themselves? How do they operate without conscience?" Thomas thought about his family gathered yesterday for Cassie's birthday while he buried his wife. He thought about them laughing in those photos while his daughter cried herself to sleep. They don't see it as wrong, he said quietly. They see it as what they're owed. The world has been unfair to them, in their minds, so they're just taking what should have been theirs all along. And the people they steal from? Those people are just marks. Suckers too stupid to protect their own money. Is that what they think of you? Philip asked. Thomas met his gaze. Yes, that's exactly what they think of me. He pulled out his laptop. I want to show you something. He walked them through what he'd found the night before: the fake medical bills, the hidden businesses, the pattern of deception that went back years. Then he showed them the family chat screenshots from yesterday. Mercedes' face darkened as she read them. They did this the day you buried your wife? Hours after. Juana shook her head. This is sociopathic behavior. The callousness, the entitlement. Mr. Lawson, I have to ask, were you aware of any of this? Did you have suspicions? No. I gave them money when they asked because they're family. I trusted them. He paused. But my wife suspected something. She told me 3 weeks ago that they were hiding something, that something wasn't right. She was a psychology professor, trained to spot manipulation. Where is she now? Philip asked, then immediately winced. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. She's dead, Thomas said flatly. She died of a brain aneurysm 3 weeks after she told me she thought my family was hiding something. She collapsed in our kitchen with no warning. The doctor said it was a tragic medical event. The room went very quiet. Mercedes leaned forward. Mr. Lawson, are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, Thomas interrupted. I'm stating facts. My wife suspected my family of criminal behavior. 3 weeks later, she died suddenly. My mother called me the morning it happened, 40 minutes before I found Stella, asking about my life insurance policies. He met Mercedes's eyes. I spent 10 years writing about criminals. I know how to separate coincidence from pattern, and I know what patterns look like. Philip was already typing. We need to pull medical records, phone records, financial transactions around that date. If there's any connection, we have to be careful, Juana warned. This is a serious accusation. If we're wrong, if this is just coincidence, then we find out the truth, Mercedes said firmly. She looked at Thomas. What do you want to do? Thomas thought about Emma, looking at pictures of her mother. He thought about Stella's last words to him. Promise me you'll protect Emma. Promise me that no matter what, you'll keep her safe and teach her to be strong. He'd promised. And now he was going to keep that promise. I want to help you, he said. I want to give you everything I have on them. I want you to investigate Stella's death. And I want to make sure that when this story breaks, it buries them so deep they never see daylight again. Mercedes extended her hand. Then we work together. But Mr. Lawson, you need to understand this is going to get ugly. These are your family members. People will judge you for exposing them. Thomas shook her hand. They stopped being my family when they left me, and my daughter at the airport to go to a birthday party. Now, they're just criminals. I'm going to help catch. There's one more thing, Juana said. If we're going to investigate your wife's death, we need to do it carefully. If someone did harm her, and they realize we're looking into it, they'll cover their tracks. We need time, discretion. How long? Weeks, maybe months. We need medical records. We need to interview people without raising suspicion. We need to trace financial transactions. Can you maintain your relationship with your family during that time? Act normal? Thomas thought about it. They think I'm weak, broken by grief. They think I'm the same person who's been giving them money for years without question. I can use that. You'd be going undercover in your own family, Philip said. Pretending to be someone you're not, gathering evidence, knowing they might be responsible for your wife's death. That's a level of deception that could destroy you. They already destroyed me, Thomas said quietly. Now, I'm just returning the favor. Mercedes nodded slowly. Then here's how we do this. You maintain contact with your family. You play the grieving husband, the generous brother and son. You gather information documents, recordings, financial records, anything that supports our investigation. We work the charity fraud angle publicly while investigating Stella's death privately. When we have everything we need, we publish it all at once. How do we communicate? Thomas asked. Encrypted emails, burner phones, in-person meetings only. Nothing traceable. She paused. Mr. Lawson, are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. And if your family finds out what you're doing before we're ready, They won't, Thomas said. He stood up, gathering his laptop. I've interviewed serial killers who tried to manipulate me. I've sat across from con artists and sociopaths and never broken character. My family thinks I'm naive, that I'm too trusting, too stupid to see what's right in front of me. That's their weakness. They've underestimated me for so long, they don't know what I'm actually capable of. He headed for the door, then paused. One more thing. When this story breaks, when you publish everything you find, I want my name on it. Not as a source, as a co-author. I want the world to know that I helped bring them down. Mercedes smiled grimly. We can arrange that. Thomas picked up Emma from Jackie's apartment, where she and Jackie's granddaughter were watching a movie. Emma hugged him tight, and he saw Jackie's concerned look over his daughter's head. You okay? Jackie asked quietly. Getting there, Thomas said. He'd worked with Jackie years ago. She knew him well enough to read the steel in his voice. She nodded. You need anything? You call. Stella was good people. You and Emma both deserve better than what life's dealt you. In the Uber back to the hotel, Emma was quiet, staring out the window at the Sacramento streets. Finally, she spoke. Dad, are we going to see Grandma and Uncle Curtis and Aunt Cassie? Probably. Why? I don't want to, Emma said, her voice small but firm. Not after yesterday. Not after what they said. Thomas pulled her close. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, sweetheart. I promise. But they're family. Family is supposed to love you and support you, Thomas said carefully. Family is supposed to be there when you need them most. Blood relation doesn't automatically make someone family. Real family shows up. Emma nodded against his shoulder. Then, quietly, Mom said that too. She said you got to choose your real family. She was right about a lot of things, Thomas said. That evening, he sent a carefully worded text to the family chat. Emma and I are staying at the Hyatt for a few days to decompress. Thank you for understanding that we need some time. Cassie responded immediately. Of course. Take all the time you need. Pauline. We're here for you. Honey, come to dinner when you're ready. Curtis sent a thumbs up emoji. Thomas stared at the messages, at their performative care, their empty gestures. He took screenshots and forwarded them to the encrypted email Mercedes had set up for him. Then, he began to plan. The next morning, Thomas called Pauline. She answered on the second ring, her voice sugary with false warmth. Thomas, sweetheart, how are you holding up? Managing, Mom. Emma and I needed some space, you know. The house feels empty without Stella. Of course, of course. You should come stay with us. Emma could use her grandmother right now. Thomas bit back his response. That's kind of you, but I think we need to be alone for a bit. Actually, I was calling about something else. I need to update my will, make sure Emma's protected if anything happens to me. Can you send me the information on the family trust? I want to make sure everything is structured properly. A pause, just a beat too long. Oh, well, that's all handled by our attorney. I can have him call you. That would be great. Also, Mom, I've been thinking I want to do something to honor Stella's memory. Maybe set up a scholarship fund or something through the Lawson Legacy Foundation. She cared so much about education. What do you think? Another pause. That's a wonderful idea, Thomas. So thoughtful. Let me talk to Curtis about the logistics. Perfect. Maybe I could tour the foundation offices sometime? See where the work happens. I'd like to be more involved. Of course. We'd love that. I'll set something up. Her voice was tight now, slightly strained. They talked for a few more minutes, empty pleasantries, before Thomas hung up. He immediately called Mercedes. They're nervous, he reported. Mentioning the foundation and wanting to see the offices made my mother tense. And she's routing everything through their attorney. That's good, Mercedes said. They're going to cover their tracks, which means they'll make mistakes. Keep pushing, but gently. We need them confident, not panicked. Over the next week, Thomas played his role perfectly. He had dinner with his family, brought Emma despite her reluctance. Pauline fussed over them. Curtis was jovial in that hollow way of his. Cassie performed sympathy while posting about it on Instagram. Thomas listened, watched, recorded. He wore a small recording device Mercedes had given him, captured conversations about the foundation's generous donors, about upcoming fundraising events, about how well the foundation was doing. He photographed documents left carelessly on Pauline's desk. He asked innocent questions that made Curtis and Rod exchange glances. And he gathered evidence. Philip had pulled Stella's medical records with Thomas's authorization as next of kin. The aneurysm was real, but there were anomalies. Stella had been healthy, no history of cardiovascular issues, no risk factors. The type of aneurysm she'd suffered was rare in someone her age, but it could be induced. Certain drugs, certain stresses, certain conditions could trigger a catastrophic event in a healthy person. Juana was tracing Stella's movements in the days before she died. She'd met with someone at a coffee shop near the university, had withdrawn cash from an ATM, had made several calls to numbers they were still tracking down. And then there was the insurance. Thomas had taken out a substantial policy on himself when Emma was born $3 million. With Stella as the primary beneficiary and Emma as secondary. If he died, Stella would have been financially secure. If they both died, Emma would inherit everything, with Pauline as trustee until Emma turned 25. Pauline had suggested that arrangement. Thomas had agreed because it made sense. Who else would he trust with Emma's care? Now he saw it differently. If both he and Stella died, Pauline would control $3 million plus his estate for 16 years. Plenty of time to drain it dry the way they drained everything else. We need to look at Stella's life insurance too, Juana said during one of their secret meetings. If she had a policy, she did, Thomas said quietly. $2 million, with me as beneficiary and Emma as secondary. I'd forgotten about it until you mentioned it. We took them out together. Mercedes leaned forward. Who knew about these policies? My family. Pauline asked about them specifically, wanted to know the details. Said it was important for estate planning. Thomas felt cold. She called me the morning Stella died. Before I found her. Asked if I'd reviewed my insurance policies recently. Philip whistled low. That's not a coincidence. We need proof, Juana said firmly. We need evidence of intent, of planning. Financial motive isn't enough. We need to show they had means and opportunity. Thomas thought about the weeks before Stella's death. The family dinner she'd attended reluctantly. The drinks Cassie had insisted on making. The food Pauline had pushed. Stella had felt ill after those dinners sometimes. Had complained of headaches. He'd thought it was stress. Grief from her father's death the year before. Pressure from her work. What if it had been something else? We need toxicology, he said. Can you get that from the autopsy? Mercedes shook her head. Standard autopsy doesn't test for everything, and time's passed. But we can request additional testing on stored samples if any exist. It's a long shot. Do it, Thomas said. Test for everything. The days bled into weeks. Thomas maintained his charade, playing the grieving husband slowly emerging from his fog. He attended Cassie's influencer events, smiled for her cameras, let her post about family support in tough times. He went to Curtis's new business launch party, listened to his brother's pitch for another inevitably doomed venture, and wrote him a check for $20,000. All of it documented. All of it evidence. Emma struggled. She had nightmares, woke crying for Stella, asked questions Thomas couldn't answer. He found her a therapist, Rosemary Sullivan, a child psychologist who specialized in grief counseling. Rosemary was patient, kind, and she helped Emma process her loss without the toxic influence of the Lawson family. But Emma was smart. Too smart. She noticed things. Dad, why do you record your phone calls with Grandma? She asked one evening. Thomas had been careless, hadn't closed his recording app. He looked at his daughter and made a decision. Because sometimes people say things they don't mean, or forget what they promised. Recording helps me remember the truth. Emma studied him with Stella's analytical eyes. You don't trust them? No, Thomas said honestly. I don't, because they weren't nice about Mom. That's part of it. What's the other part? Thomas sat down next to her. Emma, sometimes people we love do bad things. And when they do, we have to decide if we keep loving them anyway, or if we protect ourselves and the people we care about most. Like me, Emma said. Like you. You're the most important person in my world, Em. Everything I do is to keep you safe and make sure you grow up knowing the truth that you're loved, you're valuable, and you don't owe anyone anything just because they're related to you. Emma nodded slowly. Then, in a small voice, I think Grandma and Uncle Curtis are bad people. Thomas pulled her close. I think you might be right. The breakthrough came 5 weeks after Stella's death. Philip cracked Curtis's email account, not through hacking, but through social engineering and publicly available information. Curtis, like most people who thought they were clever, used the same password for everything, and it was embarrassingly simple. The emails were damning. Conversations with Rod about using the foundation to funnel money into their real estate ventures. Messages to Pauline about handling Thomas and keeping him in line. Discussions about increasing his donations to the foundation. And then, buried in an email from 6 weeks before Stella died, a message to Cassie, she's asking too many questions. We need to handle this before she causes real problems. The she wasn't named, but the context was clear. Stella had been digging into the foundation's finances, had been asking Pauline questions, had expressed concerns to Curtis about where the donated money was actually going. And 3 weeks later, she was dead. This still isn't proof of murder, Juana cautioned. It's suspicious, deeply suspicious, but handle this could mean anything. We need more. Mercedes had been working her sources inside the medical community. She'd found something in Stella's autopsy records, trace amounts of a substance that shouldn't have been there. Not enough to have been flagged in the initial examination, but present nonetheless. Ephedrine, she said. In high doses, combined with certain other factors, it can trigger cardiovascular events. It's not commonly used anymore, mostly found in old weight loss supplements and decongestants. But in someone with the right physiology, a massive dose could potentially cause an aneurysm. Where would they get it? Thomas asked, his voice hollow. That's the interesting part, Philip said, pulling up records on his laptop. 6 months ago, Cassie posted about an amazing vintage weight loss supplement she'd found at an estate sale. Posted pictures, talked about how effective it was. The supplement? Pure ephedrine. Banned in the US for years, but grandfathered in for old stock. He showed them Cassie's Instagram post. There she was, holding a bottle of pills, smiling at the camera, talking about her retro diet secret. She deleted the post 3 days after Stella died, Philip added. But nothing ever really disappears from the internet. Thomas stared at the image. His baby sister, his family, holding the weapon that might have killed his wife. We need to prove she gave it to Stella, Juana said. We need testimony, we need evidence of opportunity. I can get it, Thomas said quietly. I can get them to confess. Mercedes looked at him sharply. Thomas, you can't. I can wear a wire. I can confront them, get them talking. They think I'm weak. That, I don't know anything. They'll gloat. Narcissists always do. That's incredibly dangerous, Juana argued. If they even suspect, they won't, Thomas said. He met each of their eyes in turn. I've spent my entire career getting monsters to confess. I know how to work people, how to make them feel safe enough to reveal their true selves. Let me do this. There was a long silence. Finally, Mercedes nodded. We prepare carefully. We have backup. We have safety measures. And if anything feels wrong, you get out immediately. Agreed, Thomas said. They spent the next week planning. Thomas would host a family dinner at the house in East Sacramento, the house he'd bought them, the house that was technically owned by the trust he'd foolishly funded. He'd announce he was making a major donation to the Lawson Legacy Foundation, something significant enough to make them excited and careless. The dinner was set for a Friday night. Curtis, Cassie, Rod, and Pauline would all be there. And Thomas would be wearing a wire, carrying a phone set to record, with Mercedes' team stationed outside in a van. He told Emma he had a business dinner, arranged for her to stay with Jackie and her granddaughter. Emma hugged him tight before he left. Be careful, Dad, she whispered. Always, he promised. The house looked the same as it had when he'd lived there as a teenager, grand and cold, all Victorian elegance and no warmth. Pauline had redecorated extensively with Thomas's money, but she'd kept the bones of the place. The formal dining room where his father had lectured him about responsibility, the study where he'd written his first book while visiting, the garden where his father was buried. They were all there when he arrived, dressed as if for a celebration. Cassie kissed his cheek and smelled of expensive perfume. Curtis shook his hand with false heartiness. Rod called him brother. Pauline hugged him and patted his back like he was still a child. Thomas, darling, you look better. More yourself. I'm healing, Thomas said carefully. Stella wouldn't want me to fall apart. She'd want me to move forward, to build something positive from this tragedy. That's the spirit, Curtis said, pouring wine. To moving forward. They toasted. Thomas pretended to drink. Dinner was catered. Expensive. Paid for with foundation money, though they didn't know he knew that. They made small talk, asked about Emma, expressed concern for his well-being. The performance was nearly perfect. Nearly. Thomas waited until dessert, until they were relaxed and confident, before he made his move. "I've been thinking a lot about legacy," he said, "about what we leave behind." Stella was so passionate about helping people, about making a real difference. "I want to honor that through the Lawson Legacy Foundation." Pauline's eyes lit up. "Thomas, that's beautiful. I want to make a major donation. $500,000, with more to come if Emma and I decide to relocate back to Sacramento permanently. But first, I need to understand the foundation better. I need to see the work you're doing, meet the families you're helping." He saw the glances exchanged, the moment of calculation. "Of course," Curtis said smoothly. "We'd be happy to arrange that." "Actually, I've already started looking into it," Thomas said casually. "I pulled the IRS filings, reviewed the financial statements. Very impressive numbers." The room went quiet. Cassie's smile froze. "You reviewed the filings?" Pauline asked carefully. "I'm a writer, Mom. Research is what I do." Thomas met her eyes. "And I have to say, the administrative costs seem high. Very high. Almost like the foundation exists more to pay salaries than to help people." Curtis started, but Thomas cut him off. Stella noticed it too. Before she died, she pulled the same records, saw the same patterns. She was actually planning to ask you about it. Cassie went pale. Rod shifted in his seat. "What are you implying?" Pauline's voice was ice. "I'm not implying anything, Mother. I'm stating facts. The Lawson Legacy Foundation is a fraud. You've stolen millions of dollars from people who thought they were helping struggling families. You've used my name, my reputation, my money to legitimize a scam." Curtis stood up. "You need to leave." "Sit down," Thomas said, and something in his voice made Curtis freeze. "We're not done." See, Stella didn't just notice the financial irregularities. She started asking questions. Called the foundation offices, spoke to former employees, dug into the details. And then, very conveniently, she died. "That was a tragedy," Pauline said. But her hands were shaking. "A terrible medical event, was it?" Thomas pulled out his phone, opened the recording app, made sure they could all see it. Because the medical examiners found ephedrine in her system. A lot of it. Enough to trigger a catastrophic event in a healthy person. And you know what's interesting? Cassie posted about having access to pure ephedrine 6 months before Stella died. Cassie gasped. "I didn't. It was just a diet supplement." "Shut up," Rod hissed at her. "You killed her," Thomas said, his voice eerily calm. "You murdered my wife because she was going to expose your fraud. You poisoned her, triggered an aneurysm, and made it look natural. And then, when I buried her, you couldn't even be bothered to pick us up from the airport because you were too busy celebrating a birthday party. You're insane," Curtis said, but his voice wavered. "Grief has made you paranoid." "I'm not paranoid. I'm informed. I've been working with the Sacramento Chronicle for the past 6 weeks. They've been investigating your charity fraud ring. They have documents, testimony, financial records. They know everything." Pauline's face went white. "You wouldn't. We're family." Thomas laughed. A sound without humor. "You stopped being my family when you stole from me. When you used me. When you murdered Stella." He leaned forward. "But here's what I don't understand. Why? Why kill her? You could have just shut down the foundation, disappeared, started over somewhere else. Why risk murder?" It was Rod who answered, stupid with panic. Because she wasn't just asking questions about the foundation. She'd figured out the insurance angle. She knew Pauline had been pushing you to increase your policy, knew about the trust setup. She called a lawyer, was going to warn you. "Rod," Cassie shrieked. But it was too late. "You were going to kill me too," Thomas said, the pieces falling into place. "Stella was just the first step. You were going to poison me, make it look like grief, like suicide maybe. Then Pauline would control everything, the insurance payout, the trust, Emma's inheritance. You were going to murder us both and take everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, Pauline spoke, her voice cold and hard. All pretense dropped. "You were always so naive, Thomas. So trusting. Your father was the same way, too soft, too generous. You should have died instead of him. At least he knew how to be a man. There it is, Thomas said quietly. The truth. You never loved me. I was just a resource to exploit. You were a meal ticket. Curtis spat. Mr. Successful Writer, Mr. Big Shot. You made millions off other people's suffering while we struggled. You owed us. I gave you everything, Thomas said, his voice breaking despite himself. I bought you this house, paid your bills, supported your every scheme. It wasn't enough, Cassie said shrilly. It's never enough. You have everything: talent, success, money, a perfect wife, a perfect daughter, while we have to scrape by on whatever you deign to give us. So, yes, we took from the foundation. Yes, we plan to take your insurance money. And yes, I gave Stella those pills in her coffee every morning for a week when she stayed here last month. She was in our way. Thomas closed his eyes. There it was. A full confession, recorded, witnessed. You're all under arrest. Came a voice from the doorway. Detective Young Vaughn stepped into the room, followed by 3 uniformed officers. Behind them, Mercedes Cannon with her camera crew, recording everything. Curtis lunged for the door, but officers blocked his path. Cassie burst into tears. Rod stood frozen. Pauline just stared at Thomas with pure hatred. You set us up, she hissed. I exposed you, Thomas corrected. There's a difference. As the officers read them their rights, cuffed them, led them away one by one, Thomas stood and watched. Pauline turned back at the door. You'll never be free of us. We're in your blood, Thomas. You can't escape that. Watch me, Thomas said. The story broke the next morning. Front page of the Sacramento Chronicle. Above the fold. Charity fraud ring exposed. Lawson Legacy Foundation scammed millions. Member arrested for murder. The article was co-authored by Mercedes Cannon and Thomas Lawson. It detailed everything: the financial fraud, the network of fake charities, the investigation into Stella's death, the recorded confession, photos of Pauline, Curtis, Cassie, and Rod being led away in handcuffs accompanied the text. By noon, it had gone national. By evening, international. The story had everything the media loved: family, betrayal, murder, fraud, a true crime writer exposing his own family. Cable news couldn't get enough. Thomas's phone exploded with calls from other journalists, from producers wanting to option the story, from lawyers representing victims of the foundation. He ignored most of them, focusing only on the ones that mattered. The district attorney's office called to confirm they were pressing charges for murder, conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and a dozen other counts. The evidence was overwhelming, especially the recorded confession. Cassie had already started trying to make a deal, willing to testify against the others in exchange for a reduced sentence. They're turning on each other, Detective Vaughn told Thomas. Curtis claims it was all Pauline's idea. Rod is saying he didn't know about the murder plot. Your mother is the only one not talking, but it doesn't matter. We have them. Thomas sat with Emma that evening, watching the news coverage. She'd been confused at first, then hurt, then angry. Now, she was quiet, processing. They killed Mom? She asked in a small voice. Yes. Because of money? Because of greed. Because they couldn't stand that we had what they wanted. Emma was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm glad you stopped them. Thomas pulled her close. Me too, sweetheart. The trial took months to prepare. Curtis tried to flip, offering testimony against Pauline and Cassie in exchange for a lighter sentence. Rod claimed he'd been manipulated, that he'd had no idea about the murder plot. Cassie's lawyer argued she'd been coerced by her mother. None of it worked. The evidence was too strong. The recordings, the financial documents, the testimony from Foundation employees and victims, the forensic evidence of Stella's poisoning, it was airtight. Thomas had spent years learning how to build a case, how to present evidence, how to tell a story that juries believed. Now, he used all of that against his own family. The trial was a media circus. Thomas attended every day, sat in the gallery, watched them squirm. Emma stayed with Jackie, shielded from the worst of it, but old enough to understand what was happening. Pauline Lawson was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and theft. 71 years old, she was sentenced to 45 years in prison. She would die there. Curtis Lawson was convicted on fraud charges and conspiracy. 40 years. Cassie Lawson Hastings was convicted of second-degree murder for Stella's death, plus fraud charges, Life in prison with possibility of parole in 30 years. Rod Hastings got 25 years for his role in the fraud and as an accessory after the fact to murder. Thomas was in the courtroom when the sentences were read. He watched his mother's face as the judge pronounced her fate, saw the moment she realized her life was over. She looked at him then, across the courtroom, and he saw it, the hatred, the rage, the absolute inability to accept responsibility for her actions. He looked back at her without expression, then stood and walked out. He never saw her again. 6 months after the trial, Thomas and Emma sat in the office of the publishing house where Thomas had worked for years. His editor, Steve Moreno, was grinning. "This is your best work, Tom. Dark, personal, devastating. The Blood I Chose, it's going to be massive." The book was his account of everything growing up in a toxic family. Stella's death, the investigation, the confession, the trial. He'd written it in a white heat, unable to stop, needing to purge it all onto the page. "We're printing 1 million copies for the first run," Steve continued. "Pre-orders are through the roof. The movie rights sold for 7 figures. Tom, this is going to change your life." "It already has," Thomas said quietly. The money from the book, the movie rights, the speaking engagements that followed, it was substantial. Thomas set most of it aside in a trust for Emma, donated a significant portion to organizations that help fraud victims, and used the rest to start fresh. They left Sacramento. Too many ghosts. Too many memories. They moved to Portland, bought a house near good schools, somewhere Emma could heal and grow without the weight of the Lawson name crushing her. Emma thrived. The therapy helped, and so did the distance. She made friends, joined the drama club, wrote stories like her father. She was smart and funny and kind, everything Stella had been, everything Thomas hoped to be. Sometimes, late at night, Thomas would think about his family, about Pauline rotting in prison, about Curtis learning what it meant to have nothing, about Cassie facing the consequences of her choices. He didn't feel guilty. He'd given them every chance, every opportunity to be better. They'd chosen greed and cruelty instead. But he did feel sad sometimes. Sad for what could have been if they'd been different people. Sad for the family he'd never really had. Emma found him one such night, standing on the back deck of their new house, staring at the stars. "You okay, Dad?" "Yeah, Em. Just thinking." "About them?" "About you," he said truthfully. "About how lucky I am that you're here, that you're strong, that you're nothing like them." Emma leaned against him. "I had good teachers. Mom taught me to be smart and kind. You taught me to be brave and honest." Thomas smiled in the darkness. "Your mom would be proud of you. She'd be proud of you, too. You kept your promise. You protected me, and you made sure the bad guys paid." "Someone once told me that family is something you choose," Thomas said. "Not just something you're born into." "Mom said that." "She did. And she was right. You and me, and we're family. We chose each other." Emma hugged him tight. "Best choice I ever made." 2 years later, The Blood I Chose had sold over 5 million copies worldwide. It had won awards, spawned a successful film, and launched a new phase of Thomas's career. He was no longer just a true crime writer. He was an advocate for fraud victims, a speaker on family trauma and recovery, a voice for those who'd been betrayed by the people who should have loved them. But more importantly, he was Emma's father. He showed up for her school events, helped with her homework, taught her to drive, embarrassed her with dad jokes. He was there, present, engaged, everything his own parents had never been. Emma was 15 now, smart and fierce, and completely her own person. She was writing her own book, a memoir about losing her mother and watching her father take down their corrupt family. Her working title was Chosen. "It's about choosing who we become," she explained to Thomas. "We can't choose our blood family, but we can choose what kind of person we are, what values we have, who we let into our lives." "Stella would love that," Thomas said. "I know," Emma replied. "I write it for her." On the anniversary of Stella's death, Thomas and Emma visited her grave. Not the one in Sacramento. Thomas had moved her remains to Portland, to a quiet cemetery where they could visit without the weight of the past crushing down on them. They brought flowers. Emma read a poem she'd written. Thomas told Stella about their life, about Emma's achievements, about the good they'd done with the book's success. "We miss you," he said quietly. "Every day. But we're okay. We're more than okay. We're happy." And we made sure the people who hurt you paid for it. They'll never hurt anyone again. The wind rustled through the trees, and Thomas chose to believe it was Stella's way of saying she knew. She approved, she was proud. Walking back to the car, Emma slipped her hand into his. Dad, do you think we'll ever really be free of them? Of what they did? Thomas considered the question carefully. I think we already are. They're locked up, paying for their crimes. We're out here, living our lives, making our own choices. They don't have power over us anymore. We took it back. Good, Emma said firmly. Because I don't ever want to be like them. You're not, Thomas assured her. You're like your mother, smart, kind, strong, principled, and maybe a little bit like me, stubborn, curious, determined to find the truth, even when it hurts. Emma grinned. So, basically I'm awesome. Basically, Thomas agreed, laughing. They drove home through the Portland rain, talking about Emma's upcoming school play, her college plans, her dreams for the future. Normal things. Good things. The Lawson legacy wasn't fraud and murder anymore. It was resilience. It was justice. It was choosing to be better than your blood. To build something real and good from the ashes of betrayal. It was Thomas and Emma choosing each other. Every single day. And that, Thomas thought, was the best revenge of all, not just surviving, but thriving. Not just escaping the darkness, but building a life filled with light. The monsters who'd worn his family's faces were caged now, and he and Emma were free. Finally, truly free. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.